29th of August. Let's see who comes today.
Hello.
Hello. How are you? Okay, just had to do a video. Where is everybody today? I know Mark Anderson cannot make it. He had a prior commitment he couldn't get out of, but he did send some documentation.
That's a delaying tactic here. I see you're always trying to.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, Bob. Hello, Froda.
Hello, Jim.
There we go. I did not have these.
Right, so I guess we should wait maybe a few more minutes to see who else will join us, and then we'll go to. You both got Mark Anderson's email, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Bob, do you have anything on that? Do you find it useful, or what do you think?
I got a whole bunch of emails. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I'm referring from the ones from Mark Anderson, where he sends his commentary.
The ingredients are.
His I'm not sure I got that one. Let's see.
Hello, Peter.
He sends a lot of them.
Pizza, apples, gummies, and peanut butter.
Jim, are you the one with the audio in the background?
Yes, guilty.
Guilty, okay. Right, I'm going to paste, hi Peter, I'm going to paste here into the chat what Mark.
I never read the chat. So,
Okay.
you know, if you're sending it to me, it won't be useful.
Okay, but what about looking at your emails then from Mark? Can you do that?
I just looked for today, from last night.
He also sent it today. He sent it with a link.
With a link. Oh dear. Well, I've just over here we just got up. Oh, I see. Oh, a link. Oh, I see. There is a link. Edge cases. Oh. Oh, he copied in all of those that he showed us the other day. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he turned it into a document, which is good.
They weren't documents before.
I don't know what form it is. He had it before. I think he was speaking and showing examples, but yeah.
We have an ambiguity in our conversation here, of course, that has to do with what is a document, and what whether a screen or a screen capture is a document, is a chunk a document, is a page a document.
A document is something that can be moved around individually. I think that's a good definition for this. So a document you can email to someone, send it as a message, and so on.
So all of the above that I mentioned then are all documents.
No, you're using terms like chunk and so on, but anyway, I don't think it's really core to our discussion today. Whatever
Oh, you'll see how core it is.
Okay, all right.
I hope. I hope.
Right,
I would say that a document would be an individually addressable and independently presentable chunk of content.
Agree. Good clarification.
Oh, somebody write that down. I can't take notes and make a presentation at the same time. I hope somebody wrote that down, or Peter will send it or say it or something, and not put it in chat, which drives me crazy. I can't pay attention to you and read chat.
Can you read it again? Can you speak it again, Peter?
A document would be an individually addressable and independently presentable chunk of content.
In terms of what we're dealing with right now, it's just, I don't know what Mark presented on Friday, if he had it as a document or if he was just showing some images and talking on top of them, but either way, he put it on an HTML page for us and uploaded it, so we have it here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering if we can add your anything you want to add to Peter's definition there, because I want to work on this. You know, this is something that we can build on, and we can disagree about, and we can do argumentation mapping about, and so forth. Otherwise, we can just continue the ambiguity in this discussion for the next year and a half.
I don't think so, because
please,
Bob, because let me speak out. Because all I was saying was that Mark did a presentation on Friday. I don't know.
No, before that, you said, what is it? You know, what is a document? And you said it was not a chunk. And I would like to have that added to Jim's list so that we can debate that.
All I said,
and hopefully come to some agreement, you know, of communication. I hope.
All I said is that on Friday, Mark did a presentation for us where he showed issues with the mural. I don't know if he was just showing some screenshots and talking, or whether he had made some sort of a document. But either way, over the weekend, he has sent us a link to a web page that has that. So for our purposes, I can't see how that really matters. We have it now on this website.
Yeah, you're not hearing me. You're not hearing my question. No. Let me ask my question again, because you've repeated the answer, you know, an answer twice, and it isn't what I asked. And if you don't want to, that's all right. I mean, I'm happy to let this fly by again. But before, you gave a definition of a document, a very clear one I thought was incomplete, but go ahead. And I'm not taking notes right now, so I can't repeat it back to you. Or maybe you're agreeing with Peter and it's over.
Yeah, I think we have a slight difference in definition when he talks about individually addressable. I think many things can be individually addressable, such as a location within a document, which isn't a document by itself. I think a document is basically a thing you can send to someone.
Somebody,
Whether
all
it's-
right, got that one, Jim?
That's a
Have you
good one,
got that,
too.
Jim? Jim, you getting it? All right, good, please. Go ahead, sorry. I think this is really core to our discussion, and if there's real ambiguity, or if there's agreeable disagreement about how we want to use the term, then we need to clarify those kind of things in order to make any progress on some of our discussion, not on others.
Yeah, is there disagreement on what Peter and I said?
Okay, what if we said that a document was a chunk of content that's been saved out in a standalone wrapper?
Saved out in a standalone wrapper, Jim. I can tell whether you're writing or not. And thank you for taking the notes. I'll be back to you for them.
Let me comment, Bob, on your concern, because one of the things you asked in the question was whether a chunk of content is a document. I think what Peter's latter clarification is that a chunk of a document, a chunk in one of your murals is not yet a document unless you save it out as a separate file, in which case it's been saved to a standalone form, as Peter suggested.
Yeah.
So it's both and, or it depends. And that's what I think Frodo was implying, that it's an ambiguous term that has to be clarified.
Yeah, it is.
Bob, for context, why do you think it's so important to clarify it?
Oh, because I may have all kinds of addressable chunks of information that I then put into a larger document, as you'll see in my presentation.
Ooh,
And which I can send to you, individually send to you, or why don't I go to my presentation and we can see what happened. Go ahead, Peter.
Does the document need to have a name? Does it need to be a named chunk of content?
Named content, yes, it does. I
Okay,
think.
so it needs to have a name.
Yeah. And partially this has to do with how small can a named document be? And how do you put together small named documents, which is what making murals is all about.
Well, when we're looking at this level of detail, it depends what we mean by named.
Yes.
Untitled, is that a name or not in this sense?
Aha, good question. Got it, Jim? This
okay.
all go. It really is a good question. No, I think it's fabulous.
Well, I think it'll become more apparent as you do your presentation what these related issues are. So do you want to do a screen share?
Yeah, I'll need to do a screen share. And wait a minute. I've got the, wait a minute. Let's see, I've got the wrong thing up here. Here we go. This one. Okay. Do I have to do anything? Do I have to click on screen share down here?
Yes.
Okay, share screen. All right, got that. I click on it. I click on the word share. I open up my PDF. All right. So we're going to deal with, I'm going to deal with the Nyrex mural, the mural on the British program in charge of nuclear waste disposal and management. Question is, how shall our society think about its responsibility for radioactive material that will deteriorate over 300,000 year period when human beings have only existed for less than 75,000 years? There's a debate, of course, about that. Have had language and reasoning ability in an advanced form for less than 50,000 years. And when the oldest continuous human organizations are less than 3,000 years old. Well, we sat down at lunch with the managing director of NIREX. And here's what he said to us for our remit. I have 60 scientists running around the country drilling holes, theorizing about storage, dealing with the public, et cetera, et cetera. We have a government blue ribbon commission coming next year to see how well we're doing. I need to get the people in this organization aligned. That means defining things the same way generally and so forth with each other and our plans. He says, will you please do your thing and show us what you think we think? That was our remit. I say our, I had a wonderful colleague of mine in the UK, Graham Lester, who did a lot of the interviewing and consulting for this project. Now I'm switching to my next slide. You've all seen this mural. This is the final mural. Many people find it overwhelming, unable to really make a whole lot of sense or use out of it, although it now sits in the or hangs in the entryway to the cafeteria at NIREX, and people pass by it every day, and the managing directors and others use it for orientation. I'm going to take it apart because our subject matter for this discussion is hopefully to begin to talk about the semantics of and then the metadata of making something like this. Hi, Brandel.
Hi, Brandel.
Hey, everybody.
Did you hear that? Did you see the remit?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm now moving on to the next slide, which is, I thought that the way that I could discuss one way to look at the semantics of this mural is for me to go through a rough description of the procedure that I went through to make it, and there will be semantic comments as we go along. So the next one is which is the one that I sent you, which I think has some of the basic semantic elements that are kind of fundamental, and others are more detailed. But yet even this is kind of overwhelming to someone right at the beginning. I think Frode has sent this to everybody. I will take us back to the very beginning. We had to, once we had started to interview the program, the people in NIREX, the scientists and administrators there, we thought of several different basic constructions for what we were getting. One was a kind of argumentation map process. Another was a big oval kind of thing, which and another was a tree-like structure. But in the end, we picked up. We decided on a timeline. And this is the basic timeline that we decided on. It was modified several times during the process of making the mural. The mural took about 9 or 10 months to make. That is with feedback sessions and so forth, and revisions. You'll note that there are, at the top, there are 4 chunks of information, or segments of information. History, the near present. The near present is the term I invented for the way executives look at a problem, and they are generally looking a couple of years in the past, the history that's led to this moment of decision, and usually a couple of 3 years, maybe 5 years into the future. I call that the near present. Then the planned future, which was the main job of NIREX, is to plan what to do with that nuclear waste for 300,000 years, and then possible futures. And we also then realized that there were different elements to this, and those were the rows of this timeline. As you can see, ethics, the UK governance, which NIREX is a governance institution. At that time, it was a wholly owned corporation that was wholly owned by two figures: the industry, the nuclear industry, and the government, and they had board members. So, and they were in charge. They were in charge of deciding. So the governance, they were controlling it. I made this basic timeline a little bit like a metaphor of sky above the center line, blue sky, and below that geological layers. And in the layers, there was the waste itself, the science and technology about the waste, and the social climate about it. And on the level, I planned to put whatever significant events we had there. So that's a basic underlying structure of this map. Now, I don't know how we're going. We have a lot to discuss about it, but there are a lot, in terms of what Brandel showed us the last time. It was probably, if I had been using layers back then, it would have been a layer, and it didn't change very much. By the way, Brandel, I didn't use layers because I had learned how to do all this drawing with MacDraw, and I did all my books in MacDraw, and there were no layers, at least that I was aware of. So I just got very good at not using layers.
I'm familiar with the adaptation. No, I mean the proof is in front of us. It works out, but it is a very useful sort of tool for that organization in a newer context as well.
Right.
This is really great context for what the documents are as well. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. By the way, for those of you not necessarily familiar with Illustrator, there is a function called lock the selection. So I could select all of this material and lock it, and then it won't move when I put on other things, which is just a sort of substitute for layering in one way. All right, so now we've got the basic underlying framework or structure or scaffolding or whatever you want to call it. I call it all those things. I should probably stop and actually choose one of those, which I have not done. The next thing was to say, all right, we know.
Can I just make a request?
Yes.
Can you make that window go full screen so we don't have all the clutter on the desktop behind it?
Oh, sure. I think so. Let's see. How do I do that?
Top left-hand corner, just click on the green dot.
Okay, let's do that. All right, great, thank you.
Hang on, I don't see any difference. The green dot, that's
No, it fixed it.
oh, not on my screen.
Oh, it definitely did work.
Yeah.
Oh, can you
Good.
not see it? So Brandel, you cannot. Oh, okay, yes, now it's caught up. Okay, good.
Okay, and I use escape to get out of this, right? In order to get my next slide whenever I want it. Is that right, Randall?
Yes, escape, or you can move the mouse up to the top of the screen and then the buttons will appear again.
All right, okay. Yeah, I see them now. All right. So the next step in our project was to say to NIREX, all right, tell us about your history. Tell us about your near present, what decisions you have to make and what you've been doing, and what kind of future you have. And so you can see in the governance area, in the blue part of the mural, we started to identify major chunks of and I don't, or segments. I don't want to use chunks necessarily, although they may be chunks. They may be named chunks. Who knows? In our previous discussion, anyway, we identified what were some of the major phases or stages of their history and their planned future, and identified, put them on. This was usually done in connection with more detail, but I didn't want to put that detail in. I mean, clearly in the conversations when they were saying our early NIREX plan was rejected by the government. They told us some detail about that, which we put in our notes and later put on the mural. All right, I'm hitting escape, but nothing is happening here. So I have to go up to which one of those?
It just moved the mouse to the top left-hand corner of the screen. If you've clicked off of it, then also the escape key. So if you click on the mural and then hit escape, then that should also make it happen.
Also try spacebar or arrow right.
Okay. So
spacebar, arrow right. Nope.
Spacebar or arrow right. Is this this a PDF document, or do you have several documents?
I have several PDF documents, and each one of them I bring up.
Okay, so then you have to close this. Just do Command W to close then.
Oh, okay, that works. All right, good, thank you. Here's the next one. All right, so the next thing that we did was say, tell us a little bit more about that. What is under the timeline in the center? Tell us about the waste itself and what its history was, and the science and technology about the waste, and the social climate and social situation about those two things. And they told us, in great detail, and we segmented those into some phases or stages of history and present, and to some degree into the future. So you'll see in the 1940s and 1950s, under the waste and its danger, early realization of the dangers of radiation. Before that, really didn't understand a whole heck of a lot about how much radiation and so forth would happen in nuclear power. And then there was a whole phase where the storage part of it was really important, and so forth. So they told us about all that, and they wanted that, and we wanted that on the history of the mural, because that would enable them to orient the Blue Ribbon Commission, among other people, as to, or remind these Blue Ribbon Commission people of what had been happening, as to, and what was currently happening. Right now I go to the next one. All right. So you'll notice in these previous versions or phases of making the mural, it's been mostly text, mostly naming things, dividing the world up, and naming the phases and stages and parts and so forth. At this point, we started to think about what additional visual elements might be helpful for people to bring together things, and they would have different kinds of functions. And I only list a few. I only show a few of them here. For example, the bomb. The bomb is the major element in the beginnings of the history of nuclear power. And then in the center part here, you'll see a group of large purple arrows. An arrow going up here at around 1980s, and going down in the 90s, and going down into the pits, visually represented as a pit, as the NIREXs had an early plan which the government rejected, and they lost a lot of staff as a result of it. And then they went through an intensive learning phase, represented by this arrow. The organization is arising again after having gone into the pits, and suddenly becomes extremely important at this current time, because they have created a plan. The plan is represented very neatly by a whole series of very tidy arrows, and is also confronted by a tangle of arrows, which I like to use as the kind of issues that the plan will confront, both at the then present time and in the future. The detail of those, of course, will be added. Does anybody have any questions that, at least of clarification at this point?
I think what you're going through now is quite useful, because you're explaining the non-obvious, the things that aren't in a column or in a row. So I'm happy to keep going into without specific questions yet. Anyone else have questions?
No. Okay. So then we began to add a few more things. At this stage, as you remember, at the point between the sky and the ground is the surface of the ground, and on the surface of the ground, we wanted to identify some significant events, and they were mostly of this kind. This is 3 Mile Island. This is an earlier similar smaller event in the UK where some radioactive material escaped. And the other really major event on the ground was 9/11. That is the destruction of the World Trade Centers in New York City. Why was that? Why is that important in this sort of thing? That's because most of the nuclear waste in the UK and elsewhere around the world is stored in drums that are put in swimming pools, open swimming pools, which are possible to be exploded, have explosions of different kinds of things put in. So it suddenly became urgent to thinking about the government thinking about what should we do with all this nuclear waste. So I put those visual elements in there at this point. Right, I've got it. Then I began to, added one other thing which you may have noticed I haven't been talking about. I began to realize that there was a bit of, or quite a bit of unconscious, partially conscious, or conscious fears and concerns and thoughts and metaphors, stories, which I invented the word mythosphere for this, and you'll see that that these kind of things sort of stick in the back of our minds. We don't have really, excuse me, complete concepts of them. We just kind of worry about, many people simply worry about radioactivity, or that nuclear weapons are going to destroy the world, or will we ever be safe again? That kind of maybe not completely articulated in words worry or concern. And I thought this has to be an element of the mural. The scientists, whoever looks at this has got to be reminded that something like this is always lurking around underneath everything else that we are thinking about. So I added that onto the mural. And then this is the presentation that I think Rhoda sent around. I want to point out that you may remember that there was a tangle of arrows that represented for me, visually represented for me, and for others, different kinds of issues or problems that we can expect will confront the decision about the NIREX plan. And here are some of them that are named that we were able to identify at that time. The political climate in the middle of third term government, state of the world affairs, war on terror, UK energy policy, and is there a place for nuclear, and so forth. These were very particular things, and also the issues of all decisions are short term, criteria for site selection. These all came out of our notes from the interviews that we did with them, with the staff. Over on the left-hand side here, you can see just a close-up of that at that early period of NIREX history, where they created a plan, and we illustrate what some of the plan was about, and then the government rejecting it, and so forth. Now, let's see. I've already talked about the very large arrows to represent the trajectory of the organization. But as you can see here, as we do a somewhat close up, the arrow is then populated by a series of chunks of information that describe what was happening during this early intensive learning phase, and also represented by my concept of making some of these newspaper headlines. Now we can go back and look at any one of these. Here's where I talk about the near present. All right, you'll notice that in the mural, you may not have completely articulated it for yourself, but there are different kinds of chunks, semantically different kinds of chunks, at least semantically different as I was conceiving of them. There were definitions. There were key assumptions. There were boxes that have some data in them or describe some data, repeat some data. Others that have quantitative graphs and charts of different kinds. That sometimes represented key challenges, as we've already mentioned, and descriptions. And notice that I color coded these, which is another semantic element, partially to link them together, partially to also to distinguish them from other kinds of semantic elements. Also, for doing the history and to some degree some of the future, I invented these little fake newspaper headlines. We'll call it that. It's as if the event being described was important enough at the time to have appeared in the major headline above the fold in a newspaper. Of course, rarely did any of these reach that stage in any particular newspaper, but it has been helpful to me to be able to condense a description of an event into a small chunk. And this is a visual verbal chunk, by the way, because the newspaper framework for the headline is a visual aspect of it, as well as at least the date. The date could be put down to the minute that it happened, but generally I found in a mural of this size, the year was good enough. Also, there, as you can see, some different kinds of events that we paid attention to and put on the mural. I think that's what I want to say about those. I find it very convenient to summarize history this way. And when we go back and look at the mural again at the end of this presentation, you'll see that we also linked them semantically with arrows, or at least with lines. I forget what we did on that. Well, I have to go back and look myself. So that the arrows are the arrows connect them as closely following or even causally happening.
There were yellow lines and arrows both.
Yeah,
I've got the real thing behind me, so I keep looking back and forth.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. I mentioned this before. This is the then the detail of the urgency that the NIREX organization was facing, a depiction of the 9/11 tragedy and of course the both in New York and in the Pentagon in Washington, and the metaphor of the bright red arrows, again, to attract the eye to pointing to the decision, Her Majesty's government's decision on how to handle radioactive waste, which is, again, the remit of NIREX.
Bob?
Yeah.
So it seems to me, in terms of supporting making this and also making new, of course, we want to make the mural interactive in some way, but also it would probably be useful, and I don't know if you were part of those discussions, it's quite a long time ago, but to record a walkthrough by the author, i.e. you. So when someone has the mural in front of them, they can choose to have you do this guided tour where you will then bring up these kinds of details.
Yes.
So, you know, thinking of some kind of a trigger for that, right?
We've this has come up a number of times in a number of different contexts. Some people have said that maybe I didn't know anything about them at the time, but maybe QR block little chunks of QR, which you could put your phone next to and hear me talking about that area, was one way of suggesting. I've never given this kind of presentation before, and I had to make I've made these separations, these semantic layer separations, let's call what I've just been doing. Haven't done that before, but I did that over the weekend so that I could explain this, or at least begin to explain it to people. You're right. I would hope it would be possible. I hope we're recording this. Are we recording this one?
Yeah, we record all of them. It will be it will be up properly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I already talked about the government rejecting the first in 1997, the first NIREX plan, and its staff. As you can see, what there was no newspaper that had a big headline like this, but it was a big headline for the organization. If your staff is cut from 250 to 67. So again, that's kind of how it's a kind of metaphorical view of if we were the only thing that newspapers were reporting on, this would be the headline. Let's see. I'm trying to go to the next one. There we go. Oh yeah, and I'll bring you this again. Just shows some of the detail in the mythosphere that I mentioned and explained a bit before. By the way, Homer Simpson and Mr. Burns was brought up by one of the staff members in the UK. I had not put that in. Coming from the United States, I had not put that. I had forgotten to put that in, and I didn't know that Homer Simpson and Mr. Burns were actually important people in the UK as well, symbolically.
Homer Simpson premiered on a British TV show, first ever.
Oh, really? Oh, didn't know that.
The kind of information we need.
Continuing on the theme of metaphors, it's kind of sometimes hard to imagine how much waste there is. And somebody there gave me an image. They said, think of the double-decker buses that we have here in the UK. Imagine piling them up 6 high and covering a football field with them. That's how much waste we have. So I made a picture of that and put it on the mural so that also people could at some point grasp that particular detail. So metaphors are important. The theme of this last part of the presentation has been the different kinds of semantic metaphors that are done either visually or verbally or in some kind of tight combination of them. All right, so that's that series. So now we go back to this. All right, so putting all of the things I've been saying together, you can now look at the mural, and I'm imagine that it looks different to you than when I started presenting. Does it?
Yeah, yeah.
How does it?
To me, it literally has more depth. It's a more 3D illustration. What about the rest of you guys?
Yeah, the components are differentiable in terms of what the mythosphere is doing for the moment, and being able to kind of, because the thing is that like the purple bars, that let's see, that indicate, where is the actual, so the purple bars that say like early governance approaches, early NIREX history and stuff like that. The fact that they are such important and foundational anchors for what each of these historical phases mean was harder for me to follow at that in the past, and knowing that the sort of the actual total ground level is those surface events is also a really great anchor for being able to understand these added pieces of complexity, and the metaphor of the sky and the ground, for where the sky being the sort of the policy, I think is also really helpful for orienting.
Those bars, Randall, I would, I was a somewhat younger and not as good an artist at the time. I would have made them more visible and bigger, so that one could visually, so that one could see the structure better. But I just didn't have that concept, that much of a concept yet, because I hadn't had very many people interacting with very many murals that I'd made, and
yeah.
And as you can see, it's the complex thing of making murals, and sometimes you don't get around to getting the feedback in time. This of course was made on deadline for NIREX, and so you go with what you have at the deadline.
Yeah, no, I think that it does a really good job of communicating those things, and it's one of those things where I don't know how possible it is to have a completely naive reading be as well formed as an expert one. It's sort of Edward Tufte talks about having really dense information visualization, and really enjoys creating things that are beautiful but dense as well. But the reality of those is that they require and they demand study of a kind that isn't always available to people. And so that tension between something that's easy to read versus something that contains that density and contains that sort of value for return scrutiny, I don't know that it's totally reconcilable in a single piece of static media. But in terms of things like knowing what each of those news, because one of the things that sort of pops out to me is that given what all of the rest of the stuff does, it might actually be practical to, for example, hold all of the in a dynamic medium, actually hold all of the news articles off until you're looking in a place, and then having them sort of come in to provide color and context to the other things that are more structural and foundational happening first, so that because the sort of the cumulative consequence of having all of them up all at once can be bewildering, but knowing that you're looking at this point and then that those headlines roll in, I think is kind of something that would be an interesting opportunity to play with.
One of the things that the managing director uses this mural for, he's now, there's a new managing director, I don't know who it is, but he used to use use his own presentation. He would stand in front of it, 12 feet of it, on the way to the cafeteria, and he would do, in a certain sense, what I've done just now for you, which he would say, now this is the history part, right? And we have had a history, and I want to point out some of the important parts of the history right here. And he's using his finger and talking at the same time and pointing to their early history and going in the pits and so forth. And then here's the decisions that I'm faced with today. And he'd be pointing at the near present. And so that would also give a different framework for viewing it. But I really like what you're saying, and I would hope in a dynamic in 3D and virtual reality, we'd be able to do a lot of different kinds of things. All the tango of issues there you see. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of descriptions there's a lot of textual chunks there of what the issues that are anticipated. I wouldn't put those all in to begin with. I would have them, wait until either someone says, but it's all very nice to have a plan like that that's neat and tidy and just consists of 12 or 15 straight arrows that go right to the conclusion. But there are problems that arise, aren't they? And then bingo, you could bring them up one at a time or all at once if you want to. Dynamically, really interesting to be able to do that. One thing I didn't mention, by the way, is that the yellow ethics, that's at the top. You'll notice that it is at the top. When I had my first lunch with the managing director, within the first 10 minutes, he brought up ethics. He said, the nuclear waste, we made it here in the UK. It's ours. We can't give it away. We can't throw it away outside. You can't throw it into the oceans. There's a treaty, by the way, about that. So ethically, it's ours. We have to deal with it as a country. And I was stunned. In all my meetings with people like that, I've never had someone bring up ethics in the first 10 minutes. And I said, this is really important to him. And I've got to pay attention to this on the mural. I don't have any idea how yet, but boy, did I put it in my notes.
Yeah, good point. Peter?
Yeah, I've got a much better sense of how to use the mural now that we've had this talk. And I was wondering, did you ever think of doing a meta mural of how to read your murals?
Yes, and discarded it almost immediately. Because I think there's a meta mural for different kinds of murals. That is, this is a timeline structure. There are other kinds of structures of murals. For example, I did a lot of work on argumentation mapping, which is a tree-like structure, which you read completely differently to this. So one so a meta description would have to be different for that, in my view anyway, than one for a timeline. Does that answer your or address your question?
Yeah, I would like to see what your attempt looked like if you could dig it up.
Oh, I didn't attempt to do it because
okay, gotcha. So you didn't actually go through and then discard it after finishing it. Got it.
No.
Bob, let me try to answer the same question if I might.
Yeah, please.
It seems to me that the latter portion of your presentation, which was doing subsection verbal and graphic sketches, in effect is the kind of meta map, except it's a mini mega map, a series of mini meta maps that Peter is referring to. In the same way that Randall was talking about the possibility of the newspaper headlines not being a permanent document, but a temporary document when something is in close proximity, or when an eye is in close proximity. It seems to me that in addition to the verbal explanations that might be available via QR codes, could also make your visual mini meta maps available as well to accomplish Peter's implied purpose.
You know, what is exciting to me about, thank you, Jim. What is exciting to me about this whole, virtual reality that Frode has brought us into is how differently I might go about making these, and how to begin to think about them. It wouldn't change necessarily very much of the interaction that we had between the scientists and staff at NIREX to gather the information, but to begin to conceive of it, and even to be able to put together drafts of it, drafts of the little all right, pardon me if I call them little chunks of information that we would have partially done, would be addressable, would be movable about in various ways until we, as you can do in Illustrator, group them together and make them, and lock them in to a more stable or but even a stable but flexible arrangement.
I had one other comment that I wanted to add. Well, several perhaps. This is the second time I've seen Bob's presentation because I was a guinea pig yesterday. Mm-hmm. And my major reaction to him yesterday is that seeing in effect, the multi-layered genesis or evolution of the graphic as it grew into its final form, I found, I think as others seem to hear, that it for me was 10x more effective than just looking at the final static graphic. In a sense, I've been cheating as I've been listening today because I have an actual full-size 3 feet high and 12 feet wide graphic behind me on my desk horizontally. So I've been going back and forth, kind of checking the small things that Bob was talking about, the subsections, and for me, putting it in the larger context of the real thing behind me. But that's exactly the kind of thing that the temporary mini mega maps might do to allow somebody to go back and forth much more quickly. which is really, I think, where Frode used the 3D depth terminology. I think that's an accurate description. And by having the local elaborations of detail, either verbally with Bob Horn quotes or graphically with the Bob Horn character with verbal comments coming out of his mouth in a cloud, also including the graphics, that is especially powerful.
This is just triggered in me. I hadn't really thought of this before, but the you look at the plan that Nyrex has put together, 10 or 12 little arrows that on the right hand side of the mural. One can imagine that the Blue Ribbon Commission gathers, and what Nyrex shows them is gathers in virtual reality. Let's put this in virtual reality. They say, well, what's your, the main thing is, what's your plan for this for this waste, right? And they just show this plan. They just show the plan. They don't see any of the rest of the mural, but it's there available when they start asking other kind of questions. Like, as I've mentioned, what are the issues that you anticipate? And then there's an hour-long discussion, at least in the Blue Ribbon Commission that's inspecting them, of the government, asking, how are you going to handle these kind of things? And you pop up, one of these, one or multiple of these tangle of arrows around the plan. And they said, but how do we get to somebody who's somebody on the Blue Ribbon Commission isn't one of the experts? He's sort of representative of the general public. He says, well, how did we get here? And they say, well, let us show you. And you got, and you then got the history that you could pop up and show. And they say, well, what was happening there? Well, here's the detail behind that. Here's might be another whole, the 3 Mile Island there, which is more familiar to Americans, has a whole history in itself and might be a whole visual mural as well, if someone had asked about it, and so forth. I mean, I won't go on, but I think you see where I'm going with that. The parts of the mural might be used quite differently in different kinds of meetings.
That's especially true if a future version of this inframural, a future dynamic version, has links to the plans that were proposed or to the depth of problems that existed, so that one of, if not the main purpose of the diagram becomes answering the questions that will inevitably be asked.
Yeah. Loda.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking about here is we seem to have lots of things coming up. Key is probably the importance, or rather value, of having a knowledgeable guide do a walkthrough of the mural. I think that's quite obviously useful. Then, of course, we talked about the decomposition of the mural, because once you point out that this is kind of cut into the ground, what's underground and all of that stuff, that's obviously also very, very useful. Furthermore is, of course, the metadata behind each item, which could be metadata about a block, or it could be a virtual, so to speak, zoom in, where you actually have something different there because you have that other book that you made. So what we're probably trying to do here is to help you make a system whereby all of those things can be accommodated, and for the author and for the viewer to be able to have a passive mural like this, also to have a fully guided tour through, let's say Siri saying, you speak to the mural and say, give me the guided tour. And then it can be another one saying, what are the elements of this? So suddenly you have a palette of what the different columns and rows are, because the way you showed it here was very clear. And of course, you're dealing with the information problem of having a ton of information and limited space. And in addition to that, I guess we can also have a zooming issue where when you get really close, you don't just get things bigger, but you get things different. Like at a certain level of scale, more icons appear. For instance, the areas where you have further slides, so to speak, you get quite close, and then there is it could be a click here to see big, which is boring, but it could be even nicer, some visual representation that there's more. Now, the thing I've been fiddling with here in the background while listening to you is a 360 camera. I did a little test down by the water today, and every couple of months I go through and get very enthusiastic, and then I'm a pixel snob, so then I hate it, which is an issue. But I'm wondering, again and again, the amazingness of the pinch that we already have for this mural, which is just insanely simple and insanely powerful. Are there aspects of this that we may want to have in a more 3D space? I mean, right now I'm recording another test clip. So in a while, you guys can actually see me in a 360-degree talking to you, which has zero value really. But imagine the opposite. We view this. Do you have any thoughts on that, guys? Maybe the main thing is still relatively, slightly curved, like a curved monitor, but the different elements like you ask for, if we say, I want to see just the timeline with the basics, then instead of the other stuff going away, maybe we designate a space for it. Maybe it goes, let's say, to the left-hand side. So it's out of the mural, but it's there. Because one thing that Brandel has really impressed upon me is that VR is not just about view, it is also about interactions, of course. So that could make this quite tangible. Like maybe as you move towards the mural, towards somewhere above or below, there is handles, almost literally, or shoving this aside. And of course, then we have what Adam and Brandel have talked about, the way you can choose to compress, fold things in and fold things out. But we have an infinite canvas, so to speak, and we have very finite eyes and brain. So it'd be great to hear more thoughts of that. Going over to Yellow Hand Peter.
I can't hear it.
I think he wants us to lip read. This is a challenge. Oh, I'm so sorry. The phone rang and I muted myself, and I forgot to unmute after the phone went off. I could envision the ethics tier being physically closer and having the different semantic layers on a z-axis so that you could move into the document, and then the ethics tier would sort of do a parallax effect and move up and sort of behind you as you focused in on the next band, say the NIREX history, and as you move closer, that would drift up, and you could then sort of drift down to the historical layer underneath that. So sort of having each one of the levels at a different z-index relative to the user, so you could focus and enhance the size and clarity of one of those bands. But if you use the z-index for doing that, and I think the parallax effect might be kind of cool.
As if the medium itself is elastic and could be stretched.
Yes. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, sorry. That's really good. But as a complete tangent, for the future of text, I am thinking of using this 360 camera to do a broadcast from the room. So you don't just have a laptop if you're not there, but you can move around more. Brandel, do you know if there is an easy way to go from my YouTube broadcast 360 to have a headset view that can view that live, that's doable, right?
Yeah, my understanding is that a 360 will be creatable, and that we can test it, certainly.
Okay, could be fun. Sorry, it was just an aside when we're thinking about the guided thing and so on. And yeah, sorry, thank you for that.
I hope Apple's headset is the one more thing at the next event.
Well, according to my to be clear, non-Brandel information, it's going to be available for developers in October. So most likely we'll hear about it on September 7th. But if not, there is also an October event. So it may be that they choose to wait till October, but then us developers get to spend our hard-earned cash immediately. But either way, it's coming way too quickly. We're not ready. So Brandel, if you can sabotage the project in any way to give some more time, that would be great. For the record, that was a joke.
One of the things that that your presentation, Bob, made me. Oh, you have more pictures.
Well, I just wanted to you know, I had one that was handy. It was an experiment I have never used, but if you can imagine, I tried to portray what, you know, we might be in the foreground here, and we might want to be able, in virtual reality, fly into the background, into the, you know, how do we talk about it? Well, anyway, I'm talking about the farther distant elements, and you know, so the question would be, how would we change this into or wait, what happened there? How would we change this into some sort of a three-dimensional thing that you know, we could fly out across the plan. We could fly out across the history where the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs are behind us, and we're flying forward into the history toward the present, and so forth. That's you know, what I just wanted to suggest with that other with this example. You can fly around in this one.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think it would be really interesting to play with. While we were talking sort of toward the end of this, I was, if you don't, if it's okay, I can share my screen briefly. I was thinking of just having that space and having the layers.
Wow.
And having, yeah, just those accretive layers with the ability to put the pieces on them. And I don't know, like, for what I think I'm going to do, and hopefully this isn't too offensive, is just to try to render some of these things in their three-dimensional form, just to take some of these things like Windscale Pile and 3 Mile Island and other pieces, to be able to kind of present them as though they are in this kind of diorama, and then think about you know, putting in some actual human figures or people of, you know, approximately human size, so that you can sort of think about what you would look at. And for a start, you know, basically imagine it as a diorama, more or less as a fixed diorama, but then think about what kind of actual functionality could be it could be imbued with, in terms of various things being you know, toggled, present or absent, or have the ability to map those things. Because, you know, for example, you've got these lines, and you know, it's essentially by necessity that the contrast ratio is hard to like. There's a lot, so it's hard for each thing to kind of pop. But, you know, you imagine if you have these lines actually literally light up, and have them as though they are sort of actual light paths, as though somebody was building this as a diorama, sort of connecting and having. I think it would be interesting you know, that these are different layers. I mean, it's clear, but I'm also intrigued by the possibility of having the actual landscape on this and the stair stepping between these layers that helps to differentiate between those particular things and potentially even light them, essentially. You know, having these, you know, nuclear weapons could destroy the world, and these mythosphere things rumbling basically down here. You know, it's trite, but having sort of and those kind of slowly oscillating lights of the different things, sort of back to sort of pinball pinball machines and the illustrations that they have, but also the way that their lights will kind of very slowly pulse and roll and fade under things like nuclear weapons could destroy the world. Like, if this is a thing that's to be sort of examined on these at these times and on these layers, having them. So yeah, I'm really excited by sort of playing with that, starting with the, you know, obviously Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then getting into these things. So yeah, that's something that I'll be playing with, and I look forward to taking this new understanding to build on.
What's interesting to me in what you just said is that the difference between that and what I assumed when I was making the mural was that one of the things that human beings are very good at, if you've got a 12-foot wall, you can step back from it and see the bigger picture, but you got feet, and you got feet that you can walk up and you can look at each individual chunk of information and also see its relationships close. You can step back a little bit, and what you were doing, you know, what's dramatically different is to have the three-dimensional thing being able to move around, or also being able as a being in that world to move around in that movable world. So I mean, that blows my mind. And in one sense, how would, you know, as someone who trying to synthesize all these things, how would I do that? It's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it'll be a really interesting thing to have, and yeah, very very akin to Victor's discussion of Brett Victor's discussion of building thinking spaces.
Yes.
Do you know
what was his name?
Brett Victor. I don't know him personally.
You don't know him. I don't.
Yeah. He so if you haven't seen that video, then it's very much worthwhile to watch, and Jim, right up your alley in terms of what your sort of architectural model, the acrylic cube and the components of it. What I think you do, where I think you're taking it further, is that Victor is an electrical engineer. Yeah, you know, very very clever guy, but fundamentally an electrical engineer, and so what he's primarily concerned with is information about quantitative. Yes, Peter, I'll find it in a second. It's on his Vimeo, the Worry Dream site, but yeah, I'll find it in a bit. Victor is concerned with quantitative data around things like robotics and being able to kind of recover telemetry, and that's valuable. But as you know, Bob, the kind of policy level information that is about getting an understanding of other people's understandings, those meta understandings, are the places where I think we are. It's sort of the current wave of technology is at its weakest, and being able to build conceptual spaces for hardening that conceptual clarity between people is, as you said, like Nyrek said, tell us what you think we think, and I think that having a space that's designed really specifically and aesthetically for being able to kind of solidify that would be really valuable.
Oh yeah.
Early on, we talked about the very very first experiment here and how useful that was. So now, of course, you're exploding everything, Brandel, by adding a third dimension, which is going to be very useful. And of course, we can also look at having possible animations, possible, kind of physical interactions about things. But I really, this is one of those invention things. I think was going to be amazing to push it into the most interactive multimedia thing ever, with audio here, there, and wherever, and then see when we have to pull back, because I have a feeling that the basic view will still probably be the mural in flat 2D. So it'll be really, really exciting to see how and when to extend into these new dimensions, because it's almost, and I mean this as a compliment to both Bob and Brendel, it feels a little bit like 1984, 1985 with typefaces on the Mac for layout. We can do everything. And now we have to do that to learn the new aesthetic and the new interaction. And most of it will be absolute rubbish, garbage, horrible shit. And that's the great joy of it, because art, in my mind, is the exploration, not the final piece. A final piece of art, never, to me, having had a long art education in a previous life, it is not the final artwork, because that's always where the artist settled. It's never where the artist was pushing, because if you push, you destroy. That's the artistic process. And then you kind of step back, and then you produce a souvenir of the journey to hang on your wall or to sell or whatever. So it's really, really exciting to see Brendel going so far. And I hope we can have more psychedelic 1970s California kind of moments, plus implementations along what we can do with what used to be a simple mural and most certainly isn't anymore.
Let me add a Menlo Park, California point of view, a suburb of Silicon Valley. In my notes, I've basically said a new medium has just been demonstrated in preliminary form, which is expandable, interactive, dynamic tool. Adding the third dimension, Brendel, kind of makes it even more dynamic. And it gets to something that Bob and I have talked about, which is how the benefits of his work might be institutionalized farther. And I can't help but think, Bob, that the conversation we've had today would be and the next generation of the infomural, the dynamic infomural, would be very, very interesting to universities like Standard, because it potentially becomes a tool that helps them solve the cross-silo problem. When the document becomes interactive, where annotations can be added, whether by Bob Horn or by one of his apprentices or by somebody who wishes they had once met Bob Horn in 20 years, it's a very powerful tool because it's synthetic. It brings people and ideas together. When you were demonstrating the farther distance elements that you'd never used, talking about Europe, it occurred to me that what you have here is a history summarizing the discussions and thought process that the UK went through relative to nuclear waste. Well, you've got a template here, potentially, for helping Denmark and Sweden and Russia and Poland for addressing, and the US, for addressing those same kind of important questions. And it's about time, I think, that our universities, both in the US and UK and everywhere else, started to address and put their brain power toward these kinds of questions. And indeed, I know that's happening at Stanford with the new money that's been invested in environmental programs there. So I find this very exciting for its discussion today. I find it even more exciting for its implications to the future.
Well, yes, and the staff at NIREX, which were extremely helpful to us, were a very multidisciplinary group of scientists and engineers and philosophers and social scientists. The engineers were trying to figure out, how to, exactly how to build these casks and how to build the elevators that would take the waste down into the geology, which the geologists had of course been studying, and which the chemists were working on what the kinds of metals would be used for the casks. And of course, then there were the historians who provided all the background information for the last 50 years in the mural, and the philosophers, the ethics philosophers in that, and the organizational development business school, organizational school people who were relevant in the creation of and elaboration of the organization itself, as well as the political scientists who had then be dealing with and government people dealing with the problems on the ground every day. So yes, it's an enormously integrated synthesis.
When it comes to
do I stop sharing? I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, your sharing is off when Brandel started.
Yeah, sorry, I killed it, Bob.
Oh, okay, good, fine. It's off then.
So I mean, now that we've gone through this actual example mural, it's going to be interesting to see how we can extend it into multiple dimensions like we just talked about, but at the same time keeping in the back of our heads, how can we have an authoring system where Bob can use this for new environments? And one thing I've heard you guys go on and on about, and I'm saying that as a compliment, is the actual process of dealing with the people, because this is not a graphic designer doing a layout. This is a process where you have to show this thing to a group of people and that thing to a group of people. So the authoring system must take that into account. It can't just be a flat Illustrator thing. It has to be able to iteratively create and edit in a rich fashion, right?
Yes. Yep. You have to, if people will say, hey, the previous version you had that thing in it, and it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be able to go back and get that. Just as an example of what you're saying. Yes, absolutely. But hopefully they also in some version will have their hands in the world, and they'll be able to say, but couldn't you put this over there in a virtual reality situation? And I would say, well, yeah, but what about this and that and this? If we did that, that's going to be a problem. So that's how we're dealing with whatever we call these things that we talked about at the beginning of the session, these chunks,
elements,
which will be addressable, and elements, chunk. But I think of them as chunks. You can think of them as elements, but however they are, they're addressable. As Peter said, they're addressable and movable and have temporary locations when we're discussing them, and you've got your hands in there, and your hand comes in and my hand comes in from here, and we're doing things together in synthesizing some element of a mural or of a whatever we call this thing.
Yeah, I'm waiting for a high five.
Oh,
you're on screen. You're on screen. All right.
How do you do it?
So based on that, it's probably going to be useful at some point to start modeling the creation process where exactly those issues occur, because I would say that there is a principle that organizing information takes more energy than creating information. So in the context of this, it's very easy quickly to add an Eiffel Tower, just like Brandel was moving other 3D objects. But what meta information should that have for the future? That's much harder to determine. And it takes time when you're doing kind of a brainstorming session. You know, you're putting things in, you're moving it around, you need to have that fluidity. But when you're adding a box of information, you know, you have so many different types of information boxes. Should you have to do that then, or should that be something that the system says, okay, all these elements, now that you're done with your session, now that you're alone, they're missing stuff. Do you want to go through it? You know, I'm sure I know there's a lot of work in this, but I look forward to also experimenting with it in this context. You know, such a basic thing as what is the background, visual background, and what are the elements? Because the background can be just the colors, but maybe the colors themselves are dynamic, so you expand the different layers vertically or not. So we need, you know, it probably should be easy to do the easy stuff, but hard to do the hard stuff. I remember Mac OS 7 had this annoying thing with the bar on top. You could easily move things around. That shouldn't be easy because you don't want to do that often. And it was such a clear example of some things should be a little complicated. It should be hidden behind a few menus so you don't accidentally do it. So that's why it's so nice to have this real data that you're doing, because you don't want to keep changing the color of the sky every single second, but you may want to move the airplane in it, that kind of thing. So this is very exciting.
Yeah.
Rhoda, you talked about authoring systems. I'm thinking that relative to the future dynamic version, it's going to be about multi-authoring systems. The one deep criticism that I've had of Bob's infographics for the last 10 years has been that they're works of art in a sense that one man has created. What we've been talking about today is what Doug Engelbart named, you know, dynamic knowledge repositories. I would say this is a graphic dynamic knowledge repository. And I think that in effect, much of the NIREX knowledge might be lost or might have been lost, but for the repository that Bob's work is. And I find that awfully exciting. Brandel used the word diorama. That made me think that of Gettysburg, USA, the Civil War battle, where there is a well-known cyclorama, which is a 360-degree graphic. I've seen it only once 30 years ago. So I want to go back there now and see it and see how, if I were Bob Horn, I might redo that cyclorama, because that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about.
I do, for the record, I do think it needs to be multi-user while authoring and experiencing. Absolutely. I guess, I mean, that is a given. I completely agree with that. But in terms of stages of how we look at it, I think the other users, other than the main author at this point, conceptually may be useful for them to be just looking. Because once you have a lot of people doing this, it becomes something else. I'm not saying in the future it shouldn't be done, but you know, thanks for highlighting. I think it's in the recipe somewhere as well.
I've actually given that a lot of thought in the past with some of the graphics that I had done that are nowhere as sophisticated as Bob's. But I ask myself the question, is it better to start with a blank sheet, a blank page of paper, wall size, and a group of people each trying to create the base document? Or is it better to start with one person's opinion about what a problem might be, and then let other people talk about variations on that theme? What's wrong with this document? What's it missing? What needs to be added? And I concluded that it's probably much more effective to do what Bob, in effect, has done. You take a very smart graphic designer, historian, kind of humanist mind, and a very complex draft, and then other people can use their time more effectively to say, how might we improve this? How might we add metadata to it? What kinds of explanations are needed? That's a much better approach in my mind than starting with a blank slate.
Bob, I'm sure you have perspectives on this.
Yeah, I basically agree with Jim. However, it leaves out the what precedes that, and that is a whole series of, as I pointed out with the NIREX, my colleague in the UK did an awful lot of interviewing and sending me notes. And I've also mentioned that in the Vision 2050 mural, I had 6 or 7 different committees who were creating memos of what the content should be, which I then had to take pieces of it and amplify and ask questions and so forth and shape for the mural. So there's a whole there's a bunch of content. So one of the early things might be for some problems having a whole group of people doing creating something together. As we say, maybe there's a 3D visual brainstorming process in virtual reality at some point. That is an early phase to creating some larger and a slightly more stable synthesis of this. So it depends. Jim.
Well, I agree that the term task force comes to mind. In effect,
Yeah.
the 2 experiences you had. I myself wish that in a political sense, Congress would appoint problem-centric task forces to address the nation's serious problems. Congress certainly is not capable or organized structurally to do that. So we, the people, need somebody to do that. And it's probably true of other nations as well as the US.
Yeah. I think I also want to emphasize that the timeline. I'm going back to the structuring of our thinking in the NIREX project. Notice that the overall structure was in the mural was a timeline, but the overall structuring of the actual people who were working for NIREX was a plan for what to do with the waste, which they had decided was to drill a big hole, put elevators in, and bury it down there at some point, but make it retrievable, so that 50 or 100 years from now, when we used up all of the oil and gas and coal that's readily available, you could go down there and get all that energy that isn't going to disappear for 300,000 years, and you got it. Right? So they were thinking, about engineering and about the chemistry of that, and so on, and of course the language of that. How do you how do you write a message for people who've only been writing to each other for 10, for around 10,000 years or so, or maybe less, 12. How do you write to people, 30,000 years in the future about that what's down there? So they had people thinking about that also. And I don't know, actually, I don't know where I'm going with this one, but I was trying to say how different groups of people are going to be looking at the issue in quite really very different ways. And of course, what I think we were relatively successful in enabling them to show them what they think, what we thought they think, how they think. At least they were very quite happy with it. We, by the way, also had another project with them, with the nuclear waste people, and that was a series of 10 different kinds of structures. They were argumentation mapping structures. Now, the argumentation mapping stuff, I think, are you all familiar with that? Yeah. Yes. Randall is. Peter?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that was the sort of same structure, same subject matter, but looked at from the standpoint of argumentation. And they divided it into 8 or 10 different sub questions about which there are pluses and minuses. And so the structure of the information, the tree-like structure that says, well, this is one of the reasons you could go along with this claim, and here's the reasons why you can't go, and here's the rebuttals to those, and so forth. So we did that with them also, on the same subject matter, but in a completely different structure.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, we are talking about two different things: the content of the mural versus, the making of the mural. But I find it interesting to kind of background process, and I think what we're discussing now is the authoring side of it, and what has to be made.
Yes, the dolphins are here, and they have a doggy.
To have a doggy.
Right here, barking.
Okay.
Hello, Edgar.
He was pointing out someone's come here to do some garden work, and they have a dog, so that's why there's barking. Important contextual information, right? Yeah, I mean, in order to get the most useful work done, we need to agree on a few frames. I get the first thing we are looking at is how to make this mural come alive, right? In VR and also potentially in other media. That's probably the first thing. Then we should probably also look at various ways of experiencing it. And then, as I think we should call it almost a separate project, the production or authorship of murals. And of course, it will change the presentation, but how does that make sense? Does that sound good for people?
Yes.
Interesting. Good.
Yes, and when you say an authoring system, the first step in the authoring system is what is the structure of the thing that you're doing, and if it has a different structure, how is the authoring system different? How is the creation of the individual elements? I'll use your word for now, or elements or chunks, which are of text, and how they're really different in different such structures.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too worried about that terminology. I don't use the term chunks because to me that implies more than one thing, like you're chunking things together, but that doesn't matter. But yeah, I'm making an assumption at this point that the authoring system will be at a level of dream, years down the road with funding, that it will be in VR as well.
Mm-hmm.
That you will start with a rectangle. And hang on, I have to close the door. Sorry, we're at our summer home in Norway, and my mother takes it upon herself to take care of it, which is super lovely. But sometimes she's a bit too enthusiastic getting people with loud machinery in the middle of meetings. Anyway, yeah, what I mean is for the down the road thing, you have a rectangle, you're in a VR room. At that point, you will probably have virtual shelves of materials that you use. You will have tools, drawing tools, and you'll have means to do the connections and all of that stuff. Maybe you will also be able to do it on a 2D screen. I don't know, but I just think we should look at one thing at a time. And it will probably turn out that if we follow this logic, when we get to the authoring environment, the dream of that, it'll give us both constraints and opportunities for what the presentation could be like, which is great. We'll go through it a few times.
Brandel, do you have everything you need to move ahead with what you're doing in 3D there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I was just sort of building fairly naively some of the set pieces. I've got a little bit more done since we've been talking. I can show again, mostly just to see what it makes me think, rather than because I have a clear sense of what these things really are.
Yeah.
So one issue obviously is that these objects are much bigger than they are on the mural, and so but yeah, it's interesting to think about what the I guess one of the things that I do a lot is just sort of transpose information and see what the sort of the experiential impact and consequence is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, looking at some of the components of this. So, this is here it is. So, looking at the early Nyack history, and then this escalating arrow precipitated by 3 Mile Island, and followed not too long after Windscale Pile, Chernobyl, and just like what happens when you put those objects on there, and then sort of starting to bump this up so that it's more like a landscape, has the ability to kind of contain those through lines, but also have some of the ebb and flow and shift in shape that happens with real land. Whether there's any sort of benefits or differences with being a 3-dimensional object doing these kinds of things. So that's what I'm playing with, and it looks pretty, but I'm also curious about what it sort of does to our understanding. Also, like there's then that tension, like if this is an object, what happens? Like, is it easy? Does it feel weird for those things to just disappear and then come and then come back? I don't know. So that's where I am, and that's what I'm sort of playing with. We have the ability to make things that are lights as well, which is pretty cool. Let's see, we've got bloom here. So yeah, if we were to
so it did feel weird for me for it to disappear, but it had to do with the it as an individual element, because semantically that headline is in one sense part of the name for that big purple arrow.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And therefore it destroys what I've been calling the tight integration of visual and verbal elements.
Brandel?
Yeah, so there are definitely rules that would need to go ahead, Rhoda.
sorry, just a really important question to me anyway. Can you please go close to the newspaper? Now, imagine just this, because this is amazing. The user touches that. What interaction would you suggest to give options of things to do with it? Because I could imagine easily see the full newspaper, as in this, it loads a web window for the whole story. Or wait, what was that? That was a circle option thing, right? In
Oh, that's
Blender.
just.
I know it's Blender, but if something like that could be in the VR environment, then we could also have, so we could have an option for, I know they're obvious, but fun to talk through. One, show the full story. Two, show Bob talking about this. And three, show connections, such as show only the other newspaper stories in here, show only things from 1979 in here, etc. What's the interaction that you find at this point would be best for that at some point?
I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of walking along and sort of being able to kind of get up close to some of these objects and seeing them. And I think that having those details, it might be interesting to actually imagine what, well, I presume, Bob, that this stuff is sort of at the minimum size that anyone wanted to look at in the final form. So if this is like, is this text as small as is comfortable, or like?
Well, it's big enough so that you can read it if you walk up to it. I mean, part of that was my, printing out earlier versions of the mural at full size and walking up to them to see, what was comfortable to be able to read, and then jotting down some, size of type. What's interesting to me, there are different aspects of this. What I'd want to part of what, to answer Rhoda's question, would be I'd want to be able to get to another colleague of mine, Chip Perot, wrote a whole book called Normal Accidents. And I'd want to be able to get to a summary of his thesis behind that, because he studied 3 Mile Island as a normal accident, that is, of something that is so complex and in such requiring such instantaneous decision making in very tightly integrated socio-technological systems like a nuclear plant, that we should be expecting these kinds of accidents.
Yes,
like Chernobyl. And I'd like to be able to get into, to go back to that as in addition to just remind me of really of the details of that, which is, I think, what Frodo was talking about of having the rest of the story on it. So there could be different aspects of that one could get to from the headline.
Yeah, I agree.
What are you doing right now? You're changing something or doing something.
I was altering the color mode. So this is the sort of the colored rendered mode. This is the grayscale mode to be able to differentiate all of the objects. And this is the wireframe mode. So this is like when you go Command Y in Illustrator. It's sort of essentially identical to Command Y in Illustrator. So you do that, and then the Command 3 stuff where you sort of look at where you have the ability to hide things. That's what I did. So Command 3 to hide the mushroom cloud, do the same thing here. So I go here, I can hide that, or I can solo it so that I hide all but, so that I can work on the sculpting of that.
Oh, neat.
It's a really amazing and interesting sort of program and a way of being able to kind of approach things. bit of a learning curve, but it's fabulous to have the ability to make use of. My blooming isn't happening, and I'm not sure why. Oh, I see. It's because this scene is already so bright. So if we light it in a different environment, then you can see what it looks like. So,
bye, guys. I have to drop off now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got to
Take
go.
care,
Yeah,
Peter.
See you Friday.
Thanks.
Yeah, see you Friday. I'm afraid I have to go too.
Yep.
Yeah, one thing is, no, okay, nothing else. So this Friday and next Monday I'll be here, but the Monday after that, I have a commitment, unfortunately. I just learned about this weekend that I probably won't make it. But it's far in the future and we'll plan. And if you want to meet, the room is available. Okay, this is all very exciting. So what we've got now is Mark's markups of issues from taking the analog into digital. We have today's presentation by Bob. We have Brandel suggestively pulling this into 3D. We have a realization cast upon us again that it's not a sculptural project, it is a process which we'll have to look at, and that the interaction and authoring will have to be looked at differently and together. So that's all very exciting. Any other comments before we leave for Friday?
Oh, well, thank you for making it available and for prompting me to go to work on it over the weekend, because it's illuminating to me to begin to think about what are the different kinds of semantics that come together from different semantics is a point of view, and your semantics may be somewhat different than mine. And that's really an interesting thing as well.
All these videos are, of course, available on YouTube. On our FTL Lab website, I took down the direct, easy link to them because some of them I don't want outsiders to see. Obviously, we have arguments and all kinds of things, as any good community, not good, but close community has. Today's call, would you like me to send a link when it's up?
Yes.
I'd say yes, please.
Okay, cool. So you know her. I just saw it randomly on Twitter. I have no idea who it is, but since she was announcing it publicly, that was quite nice.
No, she's the co-chair of the Immersive Web board, when I come to the UK, I'll be spending some time actually, hopefully working next to her in the London office.
Fantastic, super exciting. Have a wonderful week, guys. I was going to talk about 360 video and pictures and how this could go into this, but no, not today. We're over time.
No, another time.
Bye,
all right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.